Welcome everyone. Today we are talking about the history of Cambodia during the Angkor Empire. The Khmer Empire during the Angkor period: power, piety, and legacy. Introduction. Few civilizations in the history of Southeast Asia attained the scale, sophistication, and enduring cultural resonance of the Khmer Empire during its Angkor period, which stretched roughly from the late 9th century to the early 15th century CE. At its height, the empire dominated much of mainland Southeast Asia, encompassing present-day Cambodia, large portions of Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. Its capital, Angkor, was one of the largest pre-industrial urban complexes in the world, home to hundreds of thousands of people, and anchored by monumental temple architecture that continues to inspire awe. The Angkor period was not a static era but a dynamic stretch of centuries marked by political innovation, religious transformation, hydraulic engineering, artistic brilliance, military conquest, and eventual decline. To understand it fully is to understand one of humanity's great experiments in organized civilization. Origins, from Chenla to the Khmer state. Before Angkor, the region was shaped by earlier polities. Chinese sources refer to a kingdom called Funan that dominated the Mekong Delta region in the early centuries of the Common Era, characterized by maritime trade and Indian cultural influence. Funan gave way to a successor state, or collection of states, known collectively as Chenla, which Chinese records describe as having fragmented by the 8th century into land Chenla and water Chenla. These distinctions likely reflect the decentralized nature of power in the region, with multiple competing lords vying for prestige and territory. It was out of this fragmentation that the foundational myth of Angkor was born. In 802 CE, a prince named Jayavarman II returned from what is believed to have been a period at the Javanese court, possibly as a hostage or diplomatic ward, and set about consolidating the Khmer lords of the region under his authority. He staged a ritual on the sacred mountain of Phnom Kulen in which a Brahmin priest declared him a universal monarch, or Chakravartin, through a ceremony establishing the cult of the Devaraja, or God King. This ritual effectively fused royal authority with divine sanction, representing the king as an incarnation or earthly representative of the Hindu god Shiva. Jayavarman II did not immediately settle at Angkor. He moved his capital several times during his long reign, but his unification of the Khmer lords and his establishment of the Devaraja cult laid the ideological and political foundations for everything that followed. By the time of his death around 834 CE, the outlines of what would become the Khmer Empire were visible. The foundation of Angkor and early development. The site that would become the capital was established under Yasovarman I, who came to power around 889 CE. He chose a location on northwestern shore of the Tunnel Sap Lake, a vast freshwater body that swelled dramatically during the monsoon season, providing extraordinary agricultural and ecological abundance. Yasovarman constructed a massive reservoir, or beret, called the Yasodarata Taka, which measured roughly 7.5 by 1.8 kilometers. This East Beret was one of the earliest of Angkor's great hydraulic works, and it exemplified the engineering philosophy that would define the civilization: the controlled management of water to sustain dense populations and support wet rice agriculture. Yasovarman also built the state temple of Phnom Baikang on a natural hill at the center of his new capital, Yasodarapura. This temple, oriented to the cardinal directions and structured to represent Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain at the center of Hindu cosmology, established a template that would be refined and elaborated across subsequent reigns. The state temple was not merely a place of worship, it was a monument to royal legitimacy, a cosmological diagram in stone, and a lasting physical assertion of the king's divine status. The 10th century brought both internal turmoil and remarkable architectural achievement. A rival branch of the royal family, temporarily transferred the capital to Kokure between 921 and 944 CE, constructing extraordinary but short-lived temples there. When Rajendravarman II restored the capital to Angkor, around 944, he embarked on an ambitious building program that produced Pre-Rup and the East Mebane, both innovative temple mountains. His reign also saw successful military campaigns against the Cham kingdom to the east. The reign of his son Jayavarman V, which lasted from 968 to around 1001 CE, was a period of relative peace, during which art and scholarship flourished and the magnificent temple of Takeo was begun. The classical apogee, Suryavarman I and II. The Angkor period reached successive peaks of political and artistic achievement during the reigns of Suryavarman I and Suryavarman II. Suryavarman I, who seized power around 1002, after a protracted struggle and reigned until approximately 1050, was a king of exceptional political and military talent. He expanded Khmer territory westward into the Mainam Chao Phraya Valley and northward, bringing the Mon people of what is now central Thailand under Khmer suzerainty. He also commissioned the construction of the royal palace enclosure at Angkor and consolidated administrative control over the empire through a sophisticated system of officials and provincial governors who swore elaborate oaths of loyalty. Suryavarman II, who ruled from approximately 1113 to 1150, is perhaps the most celebrated of all Angkor's kings, largely because his reign produced Angkor Wat, the largest religious monument ever constructed. This extraordinary temple, dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu, and oriented to the west, the direction of the setting sun and the realm of the dead, suggesting it may have served as a funerary temple for the king, covered an area of over 400 acres including its moat. Its 5 towers represent the peaks of Mount Meru. Its galleries are covered with some of the most extensive and refined bas-relief sculpture in the world, and its proportions reflect a sophisticated understanding of astronomy and sacred geometry. Angkor Wat was not simply a temple. It was a statement about the nature of kingship, the relationship between humans and the divine, and the ambition of a civilization at the height of its powers. Religion and the shift to Buddhism. One of the most significant transformations of the Angkor period was the gradual shift from Hinduism, specifically Shaivism, the worship of Shiva, to Mahayana Buddhism, and eventually to Theravada Buddhism. This was not a sudden rupture but an organic evolution in which Hindu and Buddhist traditions coexisted, overlapped, and influenced one another for centuries. The reign of Jayavarman VII, who ruled from approximately 1181 to 1218, represents the most dramatic expression of this religious transformation. Coming to power in the aftermath of a catastrophic Cham invasion that sacked Angkor itself in 1177, a humiliation that left a deep mark on the Khmer psyche, Jayavarman VII emerged as a warrior king who expelled the Khams and then embarked on a program of construction and expansion unmatched in the empire's history. He was a devoted Mahayana Buddhist, and he channeled royal patronage into Buddhist temples, monasteries, hospitals, and rest houses along the empire's road network. His greatest achievement was the new capital city of Angkor Thom, enclosed within an 8-kilometer square wall and centered on the Bayon, a state temple whose towers are adorned with hundreds of enormous stone faces, serene, enigmatic, and immediately recognizable. Scholars debate whether these faces represent the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha, or Jayavarman VII himself, and the answer may be that they intentionally conflate all three, embodying the king's self-identification with the compassionate divine. Also within Angkor Thom was the Baphuon, the Phimianakas, and the famous Terrace of the Elephants and Terrace of the Leper King. Jayavarman VII's reign also saw the construction of the jungle temple of Ta Prohm, built in honor of his mother, Priya Khan, built in honor of his father, and Banti Chmar, among dozens of other religious foundations. Inscriptions from this period describe a vast welfare infrastructure. The king is said to have established 102 hospitals across the empire and built 121 rest houses along royal roads. Whether these numbers are precise or idealized, they reflect a governing philosophy in which royal merit was accumulated through care for subjects, expressing Buddhist compassion rather than merely Hindu divine power. Hydraulic engineering and the agricultural foundation. Underlying the political and artistic achievements of the Angkor period was an extraordinary feat of engineering, the management of water across a vast and seasonally unstable landscape. The tunnel Sap Lake and the surrounding floodplains created both opportunity and challenge. The monsoon rains filled the lake and flooded the plains, while the dry season threatened water scarcity. The Khmer response was one of the most ambitious hydraulic systems of the pre-modern world. The Great Berets, rectangular reservoirs of staggering scale, were central to this system. The West Beret, constructed in the 11th century, measures approximately 8 by 2.2 kilometers and could hold over 53 million cubic meters of water. For decades, scholars debated the function of these reservoirs, with some arguing they were primarily ritual in significance and others maintaining they were essential for irrigation. More recent scholarship and remote sensing data suggest a complex answer. The berets were integrated into a broader network of canals, channels, and moats that distributed water across the agricultural landscape, allowed for some degree of dry season irrigation, managed floodwaters, and served simultaneously as symbolic representations of the cosmic oceans surrounding Mount Meru. LiDAR, light detection and ranging, surveys conducted in the 2010s revolutionized understanding of the Angkor urban landscape. By stripping away the forest canopy digitally, researchers revealed a low-density urban sprawl covering hundreds of square kilometers, crisscrossed by a vast grid of embankments, channels, and ponds. Angkor was not a dense city in the modern sense, but an enormous spread of residential areas, rice fields, ponds, and temples connected by this hydraulic infrastructure. The complexity and scale of the system, requiring thousands of workers to build and maintain, and sophisticated administrative capacity to operate, speaks to the organizational capabilities of the Angkor state. Society, administration, and economy. The Khmer Empire was organized around a hierarchical social structure in which the king occupied an exalted position at the apex, surrounded by the royal family, high priests, and senior officials. Sanskrit and Khmer inscriptions from temple walls provide a partial window into the social order. They record land grants, dedications of temple servants, and the names and titles of officials, priests, and donors. Temple complexes were not merely places of worship, but economic institutions, supported by grants of rice-producing land and populations of laborers, dancers, musicians, and priests who served the deity housed within. The economy was primarily agrarian, built on the wet rice cultivation that the hydraulic system supported. Trade also played a role. Angkor was connected to maritime trade networks that linked Southeast Asia to India, China, and the Arab world, and goods such as forest products, wax, resins, and textiles moved along these routes. Chinese accounts, including the famous memoir of Zhou Daguan, who visited Angkor in 1296 to 1297, provide vivid descriptions of the capital's markets, population, customs, and social practices. Zhou described an opulent court, a thriving marketplace, elaborate religious ceremonies, and a society in which women played active roles in trade. The empire exerted control over its territories through a combination of military force, strategic marriage alliances, and the patronage of local elites. Provincial centers maintained their own administrative structures but sent tribute and acknowledged the supremacy of the Angkor king. The construction of royal roads with bridges, several of which survive, most notably those associated with Jayavarman VII, facilitated communication, the movement of armies, and the flow of tribute. The arts and intellectual culture. The artistic achievements of the Angkor period are among the greatest in human history. Khmer sculpture, particularly from the 10th through 13th centuries, reached levels of technical mastery and expressive subtlety that have rarely been equaled. Stone carvings of deities, apsaras, celestial dancers, and mythological figures combine idealized form with an almost palpable sense of inner life. The bas-reliefs of Angkor Wat, covering approximately 800 meters of gallery wall, depict scenes from the Hindu epics the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, as well as historical scenes including the military processions of Suryavarman II and the famous churning of the ocean of milk. Architecture was the preeminent art form, serving simultaneously as religious statement, political legitimacy, and cosmological diagram. The Khmer architects developed distinctive forms, the corbelled arch, the tower sanctuary or prasit, the cruciform terrace, and refined them across centuries of construction. The choice of sandstone and laterite as primary building materials reflects the resources available in the region, while the sheer quantity of stone transported, carved, and assembled speaks to the organizational and human resources the empire could marshal. Literary and intellectual culture flourished in Sanskrit and, increasingly, in the Khmer language. Inscriptions record not only political events and land grants, but also poetry, philosophical reflection, and theological argument. Hindu and Buddhist texts were studied, copied, and debated at temple complexes that functioned as centers of learning. The integration of Indian cosmological and philosophical ideas with indigenous Khmer traditions produced a distinctive synthesis that remains visible in Cambodian culture to the present day. Decline and the end of the Angkor period. The reasons for Angkor's decline in the 14th and 15th centuries remain a subject of scholarly debate, and the answer is almost certainly multi-causal. The rise of the Thai kingdoms, particularly the Kingdom of Ayutthaya to the west, posed an increasingly serious military threat. Ayutthayan forces sacked Angkor in 1431, a date traditionally used to mark the end of the Angkor period, though the city was not immediately or permanently abandoned. Environmental factors also played a role. Recent research combining LiDAR surveys with sediment core analysis suggests that the hydraulic system, for all its engineering sophistication, was increasingly stressed by the 13th and 14th centuries. The expansion of the canal network may have led to over-engineering, with the system becoming too complex to maintain effectively. Episodes of extreme monsoon variability, alternating droughts and floods that paleoclimatological data reveal occurred in this period may have damaged infrastructure, disrupted agriculture, and undermined the economic foundations of the empire. The spread of Theravada Buddhism, which arrived from Sri Lanka via the Mon and Thai peoples and gradually supplanted Mahayana Buddhism and Hinduism as the dominant religious tradition in mainland Southeast Asia, also had profound implications. Theravada Buddhism placed less emphasis on royal divine status and monumental state temples, redirecting resources and religious energy toward monasteries and more modest temple construction. This shift was not a cause of collapse, but it represented a fundamental change in the ideological underpinnings of Khmer kingship. In the aftermath of the Ayutthayan sacks, the Khmer capital was eventually relocated to the Phnom Penh region, closer to the confluence of the Mekong and Tunnel Sap rivers, where maritime trade offered economic opportunities that the landlocked Angkor Basin no longer could. Angkor did not vanish. Buddhist monks continued to inhabit and maintain Angkor, through the centuries, which is partly why it survives in better condition than many comparable monuments, but ceased to be the seat of Khmer power. Legacy. The legacy of the Angkor period extends far beyond the boundaries of medieval Cambodia. Angkor, what remains the national symbol of Cambodia, appearing on the national flag, and the temples of the Angkor Archaeological Park draw millions of visitors each year, representing one of the world's most significant cultural heritage sites. The styles of Khmer art and architecture spread across the region during the empire's centuries of dominance, influencing the artistic traditions of Thailand, Laos, and beyond. The Khmer language, the administrative traditions of the empire, and the synthesis of Hindu-Buddhist culture that Angkor embodied all shaped the subsequent development of Cambodian civilization. For scholars, the Angkor period remains an extraordinary laboratory for understanding pre-modern urbanism, hydraulic civilization, the political uses of religion, and the dynamics of imperial rise and fall. The LiDAR surveys of recent years have fundamentally revised our understanding of the scale and complexity of the urban landscape, suggesting that Angkor was not only grander than previously appreciated, but also more fragile in its dependence on a precisely managed and increasingly stressed environmental system. Hashtag conclusion. The Angkor period represents one of humanity's most remarkable chapters, a civilization that for 6 centuries sustained a complex, populous, and creative society in the heart of tropical Southeast Asia, producing architectural and artistic works of enduring beauty and organizing the landscape around hydraulic systems of breathtaking ambition. It was a civilization built on the synthesis of Indian religious and philosophical traditions with indigenous Khmer culture, shaped by the genius and ambition of remarkable rulers, and sustained by the labor and ingenuity of countless ordinary people whose names inscriptions rarely record. Its eventual decline was not a simple story of failure, but a complex response to military, environmental, and cultural pressures that even a civilization of Angkor's sophistication could not indefinitely withstand. What it left behind, the temples of stone, the inscriptions, the hydraulic landscape, and the cultural traditions that flow into modern Cambodia, ensures that the Angkor period will remain one of the most studied, admired, and debated chapters in the history of human civilization. Thank you for listening.